Hey, it's Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and I want to thank all of the expert moderators and panelists for being a part of these Insight Jam discussions today. The launch of InsightJam.com has been incredibly rewarding with all of the contributions we're receiving from the experts and solution providers and end users. It's really been quite a sight to see. If you haven't joined InsightJam.com already, please do. And if you have, please invite some of your colleagues to join as well. And again, thanks very much for being here and enjoy today's discussions.
Solutions Review presents Insight Jam, a social media community for enterprise technology. Good morning and welcome to Insight Jam Live, our Q3 mini jam. My name is Jonathan Paul. I'm the Director of Multimedia and Events here at Solutions Review, and I'm excited to welcome in our first group of expert panelists today that are going to be leading us through an exciting topic: AI in data lifecycle management, automating risk, compliance, and security. We have a great group assembled from around the world. Let's bring them all in right now. We'll have them introduce themselves. Mark, you have graciously agreed to moderate, so I'm going to let you go first with the introductions. 30 seconds or so, tell the audience a bit about yourself, and then we'll go around clockwise.
Thank you, Jonathan. My name is Mark Diamond. I'm CEO and founder of a strategic consulting company called Contoural. We are the largest independent providers of AI and information governance consulting services, and we work with more than 30% of the Fortune 500, as well as many mid-sized, small organizations, both in developing AI and information governance / data lifecycle programs.
Excellent. Well, thanks for moderating, and thank you for being here. Dave Cameron, welcome.
Hi, my name is Dave Cameron. I actually have my own consulting firm now after a long corporate career, and I teach at University of Chicago in the arena of a kind of an applied data science type of thing. And as you can imagine, at a top-notch university like University of Chicago, we need to stay on top of AI. We need to prepare students for life in the real world, not only to survive, but to succeed. And so I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you here. Over to our other Dave, David Loshin. Welcome back.
Thanks. I'm David Loshin. I juggle multiple roles. One is as the president and principal consultant at Knowledge Integrity, which is focused on data management, data governance, data quality for the last 25 years. My other role is a new one, which is as a researcher at the University of Maryland's Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security.
Thank you for being here. Eric, good morning.
Eric Kavanaugh, host of DM Radio, Inside Analysis, and now our newest show, Future Proof. Our whole mission in life is to educate folks about data, technology, and the ingenuity of human beings and how all that comes together and makes cool stuff happen. So I'm very excited to be here with you all today.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. William McKnight.
Hello, welcome everybody. I'm William McKnight. I run McKnight Consulting Group, and we do many things. We work with enterprises to raise the level of data maturity and make sure that data is driving return on investment with that organization. We've done this I've been doing it for over 20 years now. And I'm also an analyst and hands-on analyst. So we do a lot of engineering-led, hands-on analyst pieces, thought pieces, and so on that are out there for you all. So I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. And last but not least, Yves, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm Yves Mulkers, all the way from Belgium. I'm the founder and a data strategist at 7W Data, which is a consultancy boutique. We do focus on data strategy on the technical level and on the strategic level as well. And on the other end, we focus as well on digital marketing, working with a lot of tech brands in the B2B space on their marketing, lead generation, content creation, and their marketing strategies.
Excellent. Thank you very much, one and all. Glad again to have you here for this topic. I'm going to step out of the way and Mark, let you take things over with the first question or your opening statement. And good luck.
Okay. Well, today we're going to talk really about automating risk, compliance, and security with AI and generative AI specifically. And as we all know, many parts of risk, compliance, and security can be very difficult. They could be very time consuming. And so AI really has the promise of making that much easier. And so my first question is actually going to be to Dave. Dave, what are the key areas within both data lifecycle management and information governance? Where do you think AI is going to have the biggest impact?
Well, I think it's really, if you collect data from internal systems and like employee activities, external events. You can train AI models to detect patterns that are indicative of risk, operational risk, like fraud or process failures or compliance breaches, and then get real-time reports out of it. That's what I'm seeing. It's still somewhat embryonic in my opinion, but it's showing a lot of promise. I'd be curious to hear what others think.
Do you think? I mean, we're moving to generative AI, obviously from deep learning, other parts of more traditional AI. Do you think it's going to have a bigger impact with generative AI in some of these problems?
Yeah, I think it will, because you can you can detect the patterns better and really be able to do real-time monitoring, whereas in the past it's more of a, ooh, we found out a week after the fact or something like that.
Other comments?
Do you mind if I jump in here?
Please, David.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is what do we really mean by compliance and how AI can contribute to that. And I think it involves really understanding the context and the concepts of classification with respect to what compliance really means, because compliance is really about ensuring that your system obeys some set of defined directives, whether they're coming from some internal memorandum or some law or some industry standard like Basel or something like that, which is something we chatted about, Doug and I chatted about on our information risk podcast the other day. And AI can help in scanning through that content and identifying where there are there's indicators within those externally or maybe internally defined directives that define the rules or inform or impact compliance. And so, when we are solely concerned with compliance with something like data privacy laws, that's just one domain of a directive that talks about there is something in here, we want to make sure we flag it. But there's all sorts of different things, and including records management in the government and determining when there's rules about when records should be destroyed or set aside, or when they're released to the public, and those sort of things. So we have to have a more I would say templated or more abstract concept of how AI is potentially impacting risk and compliance.
Yeah, and I'll chime in real quick here and say, one of the great powers of generative AI is summarization of generative AI. So you take these new regulations that come out, you can load them into a context window and very quickly ascertain, what does this mean for us? Just ask the engine, how does this apply to our data? How does it apply to our processes? The beautiful thing about decision support is it doesn't always have to be correct. And that's something to remember with generative AI. It's probabilistic and probably always will be. We'll see a lot of hybrid search coming in the future to deal with that, and RAG models and fine tuning and things of this nature. But so long as it's making suggestions, then the user at a control point, and that's what you do in the risk world, is you have control points at which point someone can take an action, stop a process, kick off a process, raise a red flag, do something. Well, Gen AI is great at being able to help users understand how and where these new regulations apply in their environment. And that's a very, very big deal in and of itself.
We're using generative AI ourselves to actually surveil all the world's global record keeping requirements. And so looking at the source legislation to determine, and also using it for validation, which can be a very tedious process out there. Now, so obviously there's a silver lining with generative AI, but every silver lining has a dark cloud underneath it. What are the common challenges or pitfalls organizations really face when they're implementing AI and data management and information governance, and how, what do we really need to watch out for, and how can we mitigate these risks? Yves, what do you think?
Well, in general, they always underestimate the quality of the data when they start their AI projects. That's one major concern. And it's a kind of loop where we use AI to optimize our data management as well. So I think we're a bit over the hype cycle. Well, we're definitely over the hype cycle of AI, where there have been promises made that AI will solve all these kind of things. And then we came to the conclusion that it is harder to implement these systems, especially because you need more sophisticated infrastructure and architecture, and as well the data quality, which was not up to a point where you could get the right outcome. As you know, garbage in, garbage out, this is still the principle. I mean, we've been preaching this for the last 30 years in data management, and now it's even more obvious into AI. So there is still a risk that we are not understanding what we can get from AI.
Yves, do you think that the generative AI is going to create a new push for better data quality out there, or the fact that now there's an even more compelling business case to have better data quality?
Yeah, I think definitely generative AI will help in this respect because it can help you analyze your data in an easier way. We've been discussing that in the previous sessions as well, where you say it can analyze a huge amount of data and help you get those insights and be more predictive on the issues which are into your data to get a better outcome.
And anybody want to add? Good.
So yeah, data quality would be my number one issue as well, but it's not just about the quality of the data, it's about which data do we use. And if you have not attended to what we call data architecture over the years, and you have so much data replication going on to various standards that different departments have created, then you're going to have a hard time deciding which data is right for artificial intelligence. You may not even have enough data if you haven't been capturing all the data that was possible to capture over the years. And big data presents new challenges. Big data is the basis for artificial intelligence, and that brings new challenges. The old ways of data quality, which are tried and true, and we try to lock things down real tight, those don't apply. We're talking about a different type of data, streaming data that's coming in very rapidly, that you can't look at almost record by record. You don't want to burden that sort of ingest with that sort of thing. So it requires a new look at data quality and a look at data architecture.
Well, but what would somebody say that, hey, yeah, theoretically, in a perfect world, we would have had a much better data architecture a number of years ago, but we don't. Now it's not like we have time to go back and re-architect it, or do we need to go back and re-architect it?
Well, yeah, William mentioned streaming. I thought that was a fantastic point to bring out. Streaming architectures. I just came back from the Confluent event down in Austin, and Citizens Bank was talking about how they have gone almost 85% in the cloud now, and a streaming architecture is the new way of doing business. So if you can tackle issues way upstream, that's going to solve all kinds of downstream problems. And that does require a re-architecting of your entire environment. So I don't think it's necessarily too much of a mission to undertake to think about recreating your information architecture, because if you go with a streaming data platform and you do it right, you're going to solve so many problems. I mean, they talked about how just on the customer experience side, I realize this isn't necessarily risk, but there is some operational risk there. They're able to populate new information about a customer across all their system in minutes instead of days. So these kinds of things provide tremendous value if you do them right. And I think that the time is nigh to do that.
But do you really need to go back and redefine the architecture then? I'll pose that question. Or can we tactically take advantage of it?
It's best if you re-architect, for sure. If you have the capacity to do that, at least begin that process, and then tactical incremental steps along the way get you there. But have the big picture, have the big vision to change, to leverage these new technologies, because you solve so many problems in doing so.
Yeah, I wouldn't say about purely re-architecturing. If you look at your new projects and then start with a more microservices approach, that will help you be ready for this more composable architecture, which gives you the flexibility and don't need to completely re-architecture old systems, because otherwise you lose a lot of valuable time of adopting these new technologies.
And William, you were about to add something to that, I can see.
Well, realistically, you have to fold in maturity step by step, because nobody says, okay, let's re-architect the whole thing. So you have to pick your battles, decide that you know where you are and where you need to be. There's a standard you need to bring it to, and make the right strategic moves to get there. And that requires a lot of expertise in a lot of different disciplines in order to make that happen.
Well, that sort of leads into our next point, which is from a compliance standpoint, a lot of organizations, are really struggling to stay ahead of the evolving regulatory requirements. And I guess I'm going to answer my own question to be able to start with this. There's a lot of opportunity within generative AI, but there's a whole host of compliance regulatory issues as well as risks and concerns. And how do organizations begin to approach it? We like to break it out into 4 different areas. The first one being legal and regulatory compliance requirements, promulgated initially by the EU, but now many states and California is looking at a number of new ones worldwide. And there are a lot of rules how you can use generative AI. Most of them have to do around use of personal information or decisions about individuals, but they're not listed to that. But then we have, and we think one of the mistakes organizations sometimes make is they just focus on the legal and regulatory requirements. Other areas that organizations need to look at is sort of data provenance. If we're using generative AI, how can we make sure that we have rights to the IP and we don't produce something with generative AI which violates somebody else's IP? And the corollary to that is how do we make sure that we don't inadvertently disclose our own sensitive information? And there's a lot of examples out there where organizations using AI and, for design or building and in the process, they're, giving away their trade secrets or they're building something. It doesn't end there. There's also ethical use in terms of AI. Are we using it ethically? And then, of course, the big question is, from a risk or compliance perspective, part of your approach we think is very important is safety and correctness. How confident are we? Because, let's be honest, a lot of generative AI tends to be a bit of a black box. We hope we get the right answer out of it. I'm going to give it, back to Dave Cameron. Dave, how do, adding on to that, how do we stay ahead of these risks?
Yeah, and it's not only regulations, I'd also say industry standards, right? I mean, we all have different industries and their standards to comply with and that. And I've thought about it more from the industry standard perspective where you can have, it's the data, it's the input you have, right? So what did you say, garbage in, garbage out? You continuously monitor relevant sources. You get timely updates, get recommendations. And as you said, it's challenging because sometimes one false thing could screw up generative AI in the process. So if you've got domain experts who understand on the legal side the regulations and on the industry side understand the various standards, you can start to get a sense for, okay, what's good, what's not good, and monitor the relevant sources as they come in. And then you can make recommendations for compliance adjustments based on that, in my opinion.
Others want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just point out again that Gen AI is probabilistic in nature. And so anything that is public facing, or let's call it auditor facing, is going to be a bit sketchy. I'd want as much of that to be internal facing as possible and then have some human being reviewing things, because a human being is going to catch the errors, and it can be very difficult to train models to within 95% accuracy. I saw a webinar the other day with Andrew Ng, who's obviously one of the pioneers in this space, and they were all excited about getting models from 80% to 90% and even 95% accuracy. Well, which part of your business can be wrong one time out of 20? And I don't think meeting regulatory requirements should be in that category. That's not a nice to have kind of thing. That is a must have kind of thing. So be very careful about where you implement these and who it faces, because you want to make gosh darn sure that when you're talking about meeting regulatory requirements and making filings and so forth, you must have a human being as a control point in that workflow. But that's not to say you can't help that human being with lots of automated commentary, ideas, and suggestions. I'm pretty sure that a great amount of the value from AI in general will come from suggestions, because these engines are really good at noticing things and pointing things out. You missed this field, you missed that field. These kinds of things are very, very good use cases for AI, reminding humans what they did not do or what else they need to do. But just be very careful pointing that stuff, any Gen AI, at the external world.
Eric, I think you bring up a really good point, which is a dilemma a lot of organizations are struggling with. Obviously, generative AI can be a tremendous boon for a number of organizations. It can, done well, we've all seen areas where it can provide a tremendous competitive advantage. But on the risk and compliance side, some of people are saying this is scary. And by the way, I know some regulators who would say, hey, my regulation is not nice to have. My regulation is a must have.
Right.
In addition to the other areas you're talking about. And we also believe that there's going to be increasing. We've seen this, I'm dating myself, but I'll go back to the dawn of the internet, where companies had to get on the internet because it really moved their stock price. There are going to be a lot of technology professionals listening to this saying, hey, I'm sort of caught here because I'm being pushed to be able to use generative AI. I really need to be able to use it. But on the other hand, I and my, general counsel or chief risk officer are saying, hey, these are some big problems. How does somebody sort of move forward on that? How do we know, how do we balance those risks? Because I don't think it's an option to say, we're just going to wait till we have all the risks figured out. But on the other hand, we don't want to do nothing.
Well, let me throw one quick idea out. I heard on a show recently on DM Radio, someone was talking about how in certain industries, if you have a call center, there are regulations about at how far into the conversation the person on the client side is supposed to say, this call is being recorded, or give some piece of information to the person calling in. Well, AI can monitor all of that stuff and give you very, very accurate assessments of who is doing that properly and who isn't. So all of a sudden you go from a case where you were just trying to sample one in every 50 or 100 calls to make sure people are doing the right thing, to having an engine that is tracking that precisely with natural language processing and some sort of key value store that says, ding, this person didn't do it in time, ding, this person didn't do it in time. So that kind of thing is tremendously powerful, because now you can greatly increase your awareness of who's not doing things properly and who is. But again, it's internally focused to tell management who's doing what. That's a tremendously powerful use case.
Yeah, other people want to add? I see a lot of heads nodding.
Yeah, I want to say from the compliance perspective, you have that from different angles. And the big advantage with generative AI is that you can give it various roles. And depending on the role you give it, you can have 5 different angles. If you do that as an individual, your experience goes into one field. So it's much harder to have those various contexts at the same time. And I think that's a big advantage of using generative AI, to get all the information together and having the different viewpoints assembled into one view and suggested to you on where you should focus and what you should be paying attention to. What you typically see, if I'm putting a list down of things to check out of my experience, I'm missing out 3 or 4 things. If I ask it at Claude or ChatGPT, I see they're adding 3 or 4 points which I haven't thought of. And I think that's a major important part as well for compliancy.
And David, you were about to add to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I was going to do is go back to what you were saying when you answered your own question, because I'm thinking about the question, and your answer basically just kind of stepped on it and said, if anything, AI is preventing us from being able to stay ahead of regulatory requirements. And I think if what we were to do is fold back what we were chatting about on one of the earlier questions, it's not a question of of the AI. It's a question of how we're using it. So there's 2 other aspects here. One, that is, I'm going to pile on your list, which is a risk of automation bias, which is, people who don't understand how these things work just presume that they're magic oracles that always tell the right answer, and so they just become dependent and reliant on the technology to just do the right thing. And we all know that generative AI sometimes is prone to lie about things because it makes things up, because it is predicting what it thinks it should be doing, not necessarily providing an accurate result. So I think the answer here goes back to, it's founded on data quality, but rather we have to twist that a little bit and call it, trustworthy information management, and introducing AI governance practices before you start to launch your AI program and presume that it's going to be doing everything right. So what that means is understanding where the potential risks are, and what are the types of governance tactics that are necessary, and where do you put humans in the loop, and how do you do some degree of assessment of your inputs prior to integrating them into that big pile of content, so that you've got an assessment of the risk of that data source as a component of the ultimate model, and be able to put some controls on that when you start seeing that there's the results are going off the trail.
We do a lot of work with large corporations, and typically involve a variety of stakeholders, not only the technology folks, the legal, the compliance, the risk, the records manager, and the business units. we oftentimes use the paradigm of generative AI as a smart intern. We got somebody who's a subject matter expert. They work really hard. They
That's
work
right.
all the time.
That's right.
They're good at this. And they're also extremely well polished. You ask them to write something and they sound really intelligent. Now, like any intern, they're also very naive. They're easily fooled, and sometimes they get well ahead of themselves. And so when we talk about using generative AI today, we say, what would you use for an intern? And back to some of the comments, whether we want a human supervisor to supervise our generative AI, or even having interns looking at interns. But the level of trust we could do today is to what extent will we let our smart, savvy, well-spoken, but sometimes very naive intern do a critical task.
And
Mark,
Jen,
if I can
very,
chime in there, that's very much what we try to teach at a university level. Exactly that same reason, because it is like that smart intern, right? I've got a university student, and we're trying to get them to realize that they're still naive about the business world, that they can find all this stuff through AI, but you need to talk to somebody with domain expertise. You may need to talk to a lawyer. You may need to talk to somebody who knows that field to recognize, as Eric has said several times, it's probabilistic, right? You don't bank your career on it.
And William, you're going to add to that.
So Gen AI can be very, very confident in what it produces, well beyond the confidence level that it should be at. But I like to take a different approach. I like it when my enterprise clients will allow me to look at the list of initiatives coming up, and everywhere I see BI, which is just about everywhere, we think about AI instead. And I drill in and I ask, okay, what do you want the BI for? What are you getting at? And many times I find when I ask questions that way, we get to things that AI can do or help with. And so I like it when AI is in the picture, when there's a commitment to it, and we're actually looking for ways to bring this discipline into our organization, because we know it's a keeper, and we know we have to get good with AI in order to be sustainable as an organization. And so when you take that approach, you start looking at it as almost the default. You're going to find ways to use Gen AI.
So when it comes to automating risk, and I alluded this a little bit earlier of having the interns looking at the interns, how can we use generative AI to sort of solve the problems of generative AI? I mean, how can we use it to help identify vulnerabilities, and what areas you seeing organizations doing that? I'm going to go back to David.
Actually, one of the things that I would say is let's stop AI as AI, and we shouldn't be hypnotized by that as being the sole solution. There are lots of more traditional AI techniques, and it's funny for me to say that because it's like AI has been around since the 50s, so it's not like this is something that just popped up over the last couple of years. And there's a lot of more traditional techniques, machine learning, artificial intelligence, that can be integrated into a service architecture that you could configure to help in scanning content and parsing out relative things that are important with respect to risk management or compliance, like entity recognition or locations or sentiment of content or relevance of most of these things that are within the business context that can then help provide, again, that human in the loop to provide some oversight as to where you can adequately build a more comprehensive AI machine learning architecture supporting risk management.
Mm-hmm. I remember I spent years in the risk world, and frankly, I was always surprised at how siloed governance, risk management, and compliance are, especially with adding security. They're all doing the same thing. They're all supposed to be focused on governing access to information or systems or processes. So it really should have been all in one from way back when. We just didn't really have the technology or even the bureaucratic capability to pull that off in organizations. So you wind up with these silos. And what I saw 10, 15 years ago, or at least 10 years ago, was Python being used to reach into different systems across the organization and then deliver some sort of signal as to what's happening out there. Well, now with generative AI, depending upon what you want to give it access to, and to David's point, even more traditional AI, there are excellent ways that you can get a strategic view of what's happening in the organization, even just from the network, for example. Network behavior in and of itself is a tremendous resource to show what's happening. And when you see some of these hacks, I mean, the Snowflake hack, when the feds came out a year later, said, oh, yeah, by the way, all you guys got hacked. I'm like, a year later, you tell us this? What's going on there? Point being, I think this new generation of AI, if you give it access, and you have to be careful about what you give it access to, and if you focus way upstream, we're talking about data lifecycle management. If you have a streaming architecture, you've got a filter on that sucker way upstream, you're going to catch all kind of stuff that would have taken you forever to find. That is tremendously powerful in operational risk, in fraud detection, in anomaly detection, all these different things. So there are new ways of doing these things that are going to tackle some of these siloed disasters, quite frankly, because you do not want these big, tall silos around governance, risk management, compliance, and security.
So let me do a follow-on question to that. To what extent, if I'm gonna use my continual analogy, if I'm going to teach my intern to look at all of these business operations and transactions, including a lot of sensitive data, I can teach my intern to say, hey, that doesn't look right, and be able to alert that. How about from a data provenance or data security classification perspective? Do I ever worry that my intern is going to go back, my generative AI, and blab, through feeding it to some type of large language model to say, oh, we've actually inadvertently exposed this information out there. How do we protect against that?
Well, it's either in your RAG model or it's fine tuning. I think RAG model is probably going to be more effective because fine tuning is some pretty complex stuff. But yeah, you want to be watching for PII. I think the good news probably is that you should not need to expose it to PII in order to get the signal that you're looking for. What you're really looking for is behavioral analytics. How are systems behaving right now, absent any awareness of specific PII? So if you set your architecture up right, where that's a separate domain to which the AI does not have access, then you're doing okay. But you do have to set it up properly and be wary of that. I mean, I think it's a clarion call for organizations to really do a brass tacks assessment of what their information landscape looks like, where the systems are, where that PII is. There are a number of vendors that are cropping up in that space right now. Data catalog vendors were, I think, one of the first to focus on that. But you've got to have some realistic view of what systems you have, who's talking to whom, where, when, how, and why, and so forth. But then if you're careful about it, I don't think you need to touch the PII in order to get the signal that you're looking for.
Although, Eric, I like what you're saying, but I'm going to expand it beyond PII. It's all types of sensitive information, corporate confidential, trade secrets, other information. And to some extent, PII, I'm going to argue, is the easy case, because a lot of times it follows the regular expressions. But if I got a bunch of developers developing a new technology that I expose, do I have to worry about my intern blabbing about that out there?
So let me give you like a practical example of that. And this is from a project I worked on literally 25 years ago. It was an attempt to do what today what then we would call competitive intelligence through scanning and extracting data from websites and being able to recreate, essentially what this project did is it had a particular target, and the company that was the target, they published all sorts of information about who their staff was and where they were, what office they were in, and how to get in touch with them. And basically what the client did here was they pulled all that information and they were able to fuse it together to actually derive the entire map of the office layout. And then they were able to, based on other information they were able to get, such as articles or papers that were being published, to be able to determine, who talks to who and who's working with who and how they work together, because we know that these two people published a research paper and their offices are right next door to each other. And so essentially, when you refer to sensitive information, and that's an example of sensitive information that a company might not want to be, broadcasting to the public or to their competitors, more likely, who's on their team and what they're actually doing. So now, ratchet this up to today, where there's massive amounts of information that is extractable from the, what is publicly available. And because, exactly as what Eric is saying, this is probabilistic. And so I might make a decision that we're not going to put such and such information in this article and this blog on our corporate website. And then somebody else who's overseeing, publication of content is going to say the same thing, except for another blog on another part of another subsidiary of the same holding corporation. And now all of a sudden I as a competitor, I'm taking all your content and I'm dumping it into my generative AI, and I'm using that to fill in the blanks where, okay, well, I got two different articles here and they both were redacted from publishing a piece of information, but I got enough content to be able to predict where that stuff should go. And so we talk about risk management. You have to not just think about PII. Like we're obsessed with PII because that's what's in the news. But there's so much more sensitive content, and we have to think in terms of what are our competitors doing, and how are they going to make use of this, so that we're actually monitoring the risk, because there it's not a compliance risk. There it's intellectual property, or it's sensitive information, or it's the secret ingredients to the Colonel's fried chicken, or Coca-Cola recipe. Those are the types of things that that's the corporate secret sauce. You don't want to be publishing that.
Generative AI is both fun and frightening, which is fun. I mean, I like that makes life interesting. Shall we live in interesting times? So let's get back to some extent, we're again looking at generative AI and other as a double-edged sword, really tremendous, but also a lot of risk. And just listening to us, we all, somebody may be getting a bit of a headache saying, wow, there's all these different things, and I just had to get this done. One of the questions we're being asked is how do we get stuff done while still being mindful? I mean, and it's not just for a single application, it's for all the different ways that we're doing it. And I'm going to start out by answering my own question again. How are organizations really looking at that? We are working with a number of companies setting up AI governance programs. The policies, the processes, what are the right policies to have? What do we want to do? What are the right processes? How do we do that? And not only just for safety and correctness, but for surveilling, monitoring compliance requirements, emerging trends, other things like that. And then the final part is making sure, okay, when we move this in production, how do we make sure we're doing audit remediation and other components of this? And finally, to be able to do this, how do we start by having the right stakeholders in the room? And so sometimes we see some pushback from the technology folks saying, hey, you legal folks, hey, you compliance and risk people, I'll get you later, but I just want to get this, pilot done, and then I'll engage you. And at least we're on the other side. We work a tremendous amount of in-house legal counsel and other ones like that. And we're saying, no, you want to be involved in that. And you really want to think about a program. And yes, it theoretically feels like putting together an AI governance program may slow down your efforts at a time that you're feeling pressure to speed it up. But we also believe having a good AI governance program actually in the end run makes things go much, much faster, because we're thinking about issues and making design decisions early and not having to go back and redesign something because, this is not a defensible way we're doing it, or this is not the right data that we're using, or all these other issues which tend to crop up there. And so having answered my question, I'll go to the other panelist. How do you know it's good enough? And what are you working with your clients and what are you seeing other organizations doing out there?
I'm going to start here in the sense that it doesn't answer your full question, and I know somebody else is about to chime in, but we talked earlier about data architecture and what do you need to re-architect. All the successful companies I've worked with, or seen from the University of Chicago perspective, have moved to centralized data in a single cloud platform. They just find that an absolute requirement versus, I was it Eric who was saying, I'm not sure, that said, oh, well, you have, this group that doesn't talk to that group, that doesn't talk to this group, and so on and so forth. So to me, that's not the be all and end all, but it seems to be a must to have that centralized data in a single cloud platform.
So Dave, I'm going to have a follow-up question on that, which is, one could argue that generative AI requires a new, more modern data architecture. How many of the organizations are getting that, realizing, hey, I got to start over here versus just updating my old-fashioned data architecture?
It's a tough sell. I mean, from my perspective, since I'm not so much on the data architecture side, I'm on the analytics side. I can talk about what we've talked about probabilistic, but when it comes to the actual architecture, you know, my examples, I generally turn it over to an expert that has worked in that field, has been a chief architect for a long time. But you're right, it's a tough sell.
Well, you know what you could do is use it as the lure, basically, or the bait, the carrot at the end of the stick, and begin your streaming architecture journey and have that be where the Gen AI is focused. So you have to be very careful about what topics you set up, where the information comes from. But if you ensure governance from the outset, and the folks over at Kafka are talking all about governance these days, data governance. I was like, oh, data governance, really? At Kafka? That's interesting. So if you start, well, what's the old expression? Well begun is half done. If you start your Gen AI journey in this regards around compliance, risk management, security, et cetera, and you're careful about which topics you give it access to, well, that becomes very compelling. I was talking to Sanjeev Mohan yesterday, who was saying, you really, if you view this next generation architecture as the de facto future standard, and you set up your topics appropriately, and you have streams going in. I even wrote something about this. I called it the executive cockpit, where the senior executive will have access to a system that has Kafka topics from all these main systems coming into their view, into a vector database, perhaps in a RAG model, such that he or she can sit there and ask questions all day long about what's happening in the organization. And obviously the executives have the complete access to what's happening, or near complete access. But point being, you can use these streaming architecture piecemeal, one topic at a time, as the genesis of this new way of doing business. And that way you have tight controls over what data it gets access to. In other words, you're not just pointing it at your network anymore. You're allowing it to ingest these topics that have been carefully selected and governed. And that may be your journey. And once people start recognizing the benefits of that, I can promise you more people are going to want to get involved, and that creates an attraction that brings people to the table.
Others want to add to that?
So, Mark, I think what you've really asked is it's a big, still human judgment call about how to move an organization forward with Gen AI. I like to work Gen AI into everything possible at a certain level that makes sense. We use a maturity model. So I guess that's my answer. Is we use a maturity model where we see what other organizations, what paths they have forged, and look at what's next based upon that.
Do you have a favorite maturity model that you use?
Well, we have one. So, I use ours, but there are others. And we just look at what's next. Where are you? And what's next in various areas of data maturity. And that we try to work in. Yeah.
We use a governance framework that's roughly based on some of the NIST and ISO stuff, but it's expanded beyond that. I don't think there's one, a government published model that covers everything. All right. So William, you actually come around, and Eve, I'm going to give you this question to start with, which is, okay, so we're going through our journey here. We looked at the risks. We're getting out there. Suppose we're in production. How do we measure the effectiveness of compliance? How do we know that, hey, we can sleep at night knowing that our intern is not saying something or doing something inappropriate, or generative AI interns doing it, that we're being smart about it? Metrics, KPIs, what are you finding organizations are doing?
Yeah, this is tough in the traditional ROI way, because you're talking about trying to avoid a negative that has a very small chance of happening. However, if it does happen, it's got really big catastrophic consequences. So you can use an ROI model. We like to look at different things that are somewhere between nothing and an ROI model, like what are the false positives and false negatives that are being generated? And also what is, we want to try to improve the mean time to detect and repair. And I think that's another thing that machine learning and Gen AI can be looking at and helping us with, whether it's repairing a network situation or responding to a customer. These are some of the times that we want to drive down, and we can do that with AI.
Eve, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I think like William is saying, well, proving the ROI of all these efforts is pretty hard. Just implementing something and said, okay, very likely we would have avoided, 2,000 data breaches by implementing this governance model. That's pretty hard to prove. If thanks to what you have implemented, it never happens. So that's a pretty hard one to measure in such a way. But I think if we define the principles on security, scalability, flexibility, and governance, and live by these principles, we're already pretty good governant in such a way. And governance goes in two ways, to my feeling. It's more onto what are the values of the companies and what is, subscribed by the government, and walking those two paths and keeping the balance between them. This is where you make the trade-off between going fast, being innovative, and still being compliant. So that's the big struggle what most companies are facing. I still recall on a project where we were discussing, hey, do we need to implement the security model and so on and so forth, and what about the governance? And they just honestly told me, well, there are only 6 of the business analysts that have access to the data, so why should we bother implementing all this GDPR stuff and so on and so forth? Thought, yeah, you get a certain point not to implement too much, but on the other hand, you need to think about it. And so many years ago, we started off with security by design, and this is still important. Where you came in, Mark, on that point. If we start in the beginning by the right principles, we don't have to do so much rework afterwards.
I'm going to add to my own question to say that what we encourage is let's develop a governance function. Let's have the right policies and processes, and let's trust those. I mean, if we're looking at all the right things and we're monitoring them with appropriate due diligence efforts, at some level there's going to have to be a trust. In any type of risk or compliance, there's no such thing as we all know as perfect risk, mitigation or perfect compliance, and you've got to find a way to be able to do that. But I don't think there's a single KPI, but rather looking at, again, I'll go back to, are we in compliance? Are we have the right data provenance? Are we managing sensitive information? Do we have the safety? Is this correct? Are we ethical? And you look at all those areas, at some point you get a confidence level that, hey, this is good. And likewise, maybe you're going to have an application or some use of it that you don't feel like, hey, we're not there yet. Well, hey, that's much better. As one of you pointed out, getting this wrong can be really, really hurtful, and at least having some experience and then making that an ongoing function. All right, I'm going to go through each of the panelists, and very briefly, we've talked about a lot of topics. Give us, there's one thing we want the attendees to go home with or learn with today. Can you briefly, in 30 or 45 seconds, give us an overview of what's your take home? And Dave, I'm going to give you, what's your take home that you want people to remember today?
This is a great tool. It's a great opportunity, but don't just turn it over to the machine. Ensure that you have an expert that's both domain expertise, legal expertise, that kind of stuff, to recognize that it is probability based. And you don't want to take that chance that you've just violated privacy, violated a law, or you've messed up consumers' view of you.
I'll chime in real quick here. I would suggest that this is the last big chance to get it right. So focus. I mean, this is an inflection point right now that we're facing. This is a sea change that we're going through. So this is an excellent chance to learn from all the mistakes of the past, get it right this time, use Gen AI appropriately, mostly internal focused. I mean, I've heard that time and time again. We'll get to a point where it could be externally focused, but decision support, again, doesn't always have to be right. So decision support, whether it's for governance, security, compliance, whatever the case may be, just business analytics, really good stuff, but this is a chance to get it right. So focus right now and get it right.
Are you at all worried that organizations you're seeing right now are not getting it right?
Yeah, for sure.
It scares me too.
Question.
David, what do we go home with?
So in reflection of all the things that have cropped up in the conversation today, but also in my own personal perspective on what are the pitfalls that organizations are facing, I think it is the same thing that we go through every couple of years, which is there's some hypnotizing technology that everybody believes is going to be the be all and end all, you can go back and check all your Hadoop implementations to make sure that those are still working. And I think the real issue here is not that the technology isn't great or that it doesn't do great things or that it's necessary to have it, but rather the fundamental issues that plague any of these implementations is twofold. One, people don't understand that it's all about the data. It's all about getting the right information into the system and making sure that there's some controls over the quality of that information. Number two, it's having a systemic view, which says it's not just cracking open the shrink wrap on the box and then magically rainbows are going to pop out. It's these are complicated things that need to be integrated into an environment, many of which have been in existence for 30 plus years, and they're not going to change on a dime, and they're not going to stop for 2 years to re-architect their systems. And so it's really a question of, can I put the right architecture in place and have a transition strategy and have the right data governance in place and the right AI risk governance in place to ensure that I don't have to do this and then 3 years from now rip it out because it has failed and the people who approved it, they've now gone on to become the chief data officers at some other place because
we've never seen that happen in other types of large IT initiatives. Yves,
right.
What do we learn?
Well, definitely, what I've taken away from today is don't get behind. Look at the possibilities of AI and Gen AI and what it can do, and as well what it can't do. So don't believe the overpromise of AI will solve everything, and look at the same time about which expertise you are missing in your organization. And already, if you are not started yet with AI and Gen AI, make sure that you get this expertise in-house so you can already start with the proof of concepts and see what it can bring for your business. And an important thing that we've been discussing over and over today is putting the guardrails in place, not as so secure in such a way, but making sure that you understand if I put some data into the model, what are the implications? What are the replications? What is the risk when I put this data over there? So making sure that people understand what their actions will trigger if they don't pay attention. And always, if you're starting with AI and Gen AI, make it business focused. Don't do it just for the fun of the technology, but make sure that you implement something that brings business value.
And William.
So these are all great. But if we want something tangible to look at, there is something out there in regards to the risk of using Gen AI. You cannot use Gen AI and LLMs, for that matter, with impunity. Look at the EU AI Act, and probably coming soon to a country near you. But that does say that you are responsible for the use of LLMs through your website, through your vehicles, and the information that it gives out, you will be held responsible too. So you're going to have to know something about what how those LLMs are brought together, and you should really thoroughly test it according to the models that you want to apply to it. And you should probably limit the scope of how you're using these tools with some fine tuning or a small language model or RAG architectures.
And I'll just round it out. I think 2024 and 2025 is going to be the tug of war. I think that the promise that AI and the productivity and the, quite frankly, the financial pressure for organizations to use generative AI is going to be huge. Right. At the same time, we haven't quite seen them yet, or most organizations, but they're here. You just haven't seen them. The risk, the compliance issues out there is going to create an incredible tug of war between these two. And I don't think that that's an unsolvable problem. I think you need to create an AI governance program that early on outlays the risks, the compliance, the requirements, the ethics, all these different components, and sort of build that in so you not only can use today's application, but you have a repeatable process that you can continue to, as new uses of generative AI, you don't struggle with this. And most important, you're first to market, or you're nearly first to market with something that's compliant and defensible and safe. And you're confident to be able to do that. And so again, I'll go back to really thinking about having the right AI governance program early in the process.
I wanted to come back in here at the end of the show and first and foremost, thank each of you for your time over the past hour. It's been great to listen in on this conversation. So thank you again for your time. Before we go, I'd love to invite each of you 30 seconds or less to promote whatever you'd like, whether that's your own personal blog, a podcast, your company solution consulting firm. We'll start with Yves right below me there.
Well, promotion. We're focused on data strategy, analytics, and AI strategies. So anybody that wants to have some help in getting that set up and understanding what are the possibilities of the new technology, the old technology as well, you can contact me on LinkedIn, right over on Twitter, or if you want to stay updated on what is happening in this exciting space, you can always write up to our newsletter or join us on our YouTube channel for the Data Strategy Gurus podcast. Excellent. Thank you for joining us again, Yves. Nice to have you here. William, where would you like to send the audience?
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining. I enjoy talking about this stuff, and I do a lot of that. And but what we're most proud of is that we get things done inside of organizations. So we're not just going to talk. We're going to get it done. We're going to lay out a plan that's workable, and we're going to work with your resources and ours to get it done. And we're abiding by the ROI requirement of the application, but also raising your maturity at the same time, which is essential today in this very important area of competitive advantage, which is enterprise data. So you can find us at McKnightCG.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Thank you, William. Eric, how about you?
Do not miss ELO's Over and Out tour. They're touring right now, the Electric Light Orchestra with Jeff Lynne. Don't miss them. I saw them in Cleveland. First time ever. They've been my favorite band for 50 years. This is the final tour, folks. Don't miss it.
Appreciate that plug. Right on. David.
Well, I think, we've been doing data strategy consulting for many years, but what I really want to do is promote the information risk podcast that I do with Doug Atkinson on Insight Jam. And if you go to YouTube and search for information risk, you will hear Doug and I talking about all these topics and even giving some real examples and some real opportunities for where we can introduce new ideas and techniques to address information risk and especially AI risk.
Well said, and I always love to hear about plugs for our co-programming here on the Insight Jam and Solutions Review channels. Dave Cameron.
I would like to mention that a lot of people want to know, where can I learn more? Where can I learn from experts? At the University of Chicago, we have a continuing education program in our professional education division. You can come and take one class, a series of classes, it doesn't matter, and learn from experts and be able to really understand this better and maybe not be so nervous about it.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. And last but not least, our moderator, thank you again, Mark.
Thank you. So Control is we work with more than 30% of the Fortune 500. We've been really helping organizations get their arms around compliance, risk, and governance with technology for more than 22 years. We work with a lot of organizations, really getting everybody on the same page, figuring out what we need to do, what are the right policies, what do we need to comply with, and likewise, how do we make sure that we can do this and get things going and moving. We have a wealth of resources at Contoral.com, including we just completed a 4-part AI governance webinar series that's available complimentary, accessible via our website. Again, Contoral.com. Lots of other white papers on how we can be smart early on in using generative AI. And so everybody is comfortable and we're successful.
Excellent. Thank you again. And thank you for watching. That will do it for this particular panel. But if you'd like to dive deeper into this topic, please visit our growing community at InsightJam.com, an always-on destination for all your technology needs and research. And while you're there, make sure to connect with some of the experts you heard from over the past hour. Mark, Dave, David, Eric, William, and Yves, thank you again so much for your time. If you would like to hear more insight about AI or enterprise technology, stay tuned to the Solutions Review and Insight Jam channels today, because we have 2 more hours of content programming coming up. At noon, we have a solution spotlight from our friends over at Observe AI. And then at 2:00 p.m. Eastern, we have another panel on bridging the AI divide, upskilling strategies for enterprise software teams. Until then, though, thank you very much for your time and attention. We hope you have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.